welcome to DEC Buyer. And I've got with me a couple of luminaries from the communications space. So Doug Green is the publisher of Telecom Reseller and does a lot of podcasting for the CCA, the Cloud Communications Alliance. Jeffery Pearl, longtime friend, been a good friend for, I don't know how long, Jeffrey, at least 15 years or so.
Yeah.
And our first customer back in Simple Signal. So it was one of those times where it was trying because it was all new.
Yeah.
It was all exploding all over everywhere. It worked some of the times. Maybe we said it worked most of the time, but it certainly didn't work all the time.
Right.
Jitter, chop, just breakdowns everywhere. But we all got through this together and survived it somehow. So let me go back a little bit in my story. So back in the late 1990s, I recognized that the business I was in was winding down. We were all headed for Y2K. And what I was doing was selling memory to computer makers, and it was in shortage, and it was a really great business. But after the year 2000, everything went into surplus, and there was just a glut of these chips everywhere, and I couldn't make any money on it. So I went to my largest customer at the time, who was Cisco Systems, and that buyer told me what was going to happen next, because I asked him, where does this go now? And he said, oh, we're putting voice over the internet, Dave. Well, if you remember, Al Gore invented the internet in 1995. So anyway, he said, not he said, but I said to this buyer, well, tell me a little bit about that, because that really could be disruptive. I mean, it could change everything with telco. AT&T would no longer have the monopoly that it has, where you had to plug into that phone with a special jack, and you were really captive if you wanted to have a telephone connection to use certain LECs. So anyway, we decided to go down this road, or I decided to go down this road, and I hired a voice engineer, and that was sort of the beginning. I moved into a Denver data space where we could meet together with all these other providers of bandwidth, and we created a switch. We bought a BroadSoft switch, and we started to make it work. And it was so thrilling to be part of something that was on the edge like that, that was disrupting everything. Actually, it just turned out we were a little disturbing. We didn't really create the disruption I wanted to. But that's happening again right now, because everything is changing. And Jeffrey, you are living this technology now that has allowed you to work from anywhere, not just home, but from anywhere. So tell us about your journey.
Yeah, right now I'm sitting in this Marriott down here in beautiful Portsmouth, New Hampshire. And, as I was just saying, I think this is my fourth video call this morning already. I mean, this is my life, and it's interesting, Dave. And yeah, we had a great run together. So thank you for all that. That was fun. I started in this business. I graduated from college in 1986. AT&T had just broken up. So, I've seen all those changes from AT&T's competition to the data and internet and, to voice over IP, and certainly where we are today. But, it's interesting. We can just send out a link to each other like we just did here. I mean, what's this call costing each one of us? $0, right? I mean, it's just a link. I'm on the Marriott Wi-Fi here. So I'm on the internet, and we're just transmitting. We've got voice, video, screen share, whatever you want, all essentially for free. And what's interesting, that model has become easier. Dave, you touched on jitter and all the issues we had. We were the early soldiers out there on the field, taking all the wounds, because our network could have been running pristine, but the customer's LAN wasn't really VoIP ready yet, and they had issues in the LAN, right? I said this probably a million times running the business, that, oh, they're having an issue. Just so you know, Mr. Customer, I'll look at everything for you, but 99% of the time it's in your LAN. No one ever liked that answer, but that was the truth, wasn't it?
Yeah. Well, T1s were $1,200 a month,
Right.
So we were trying to put this over things like, DSL and some really compromised bandwidth. And so it just didn't work right until we started to get some decent bandwidth. So we were way ahead of the curve. and struggling through that. We knew it could work, but it didn't always work.
Yeah, and look at your point now. I just dropped in here at a hotel, flip open my MacBook Air, and click on a link, and we're having a full-blown, beautiful video conversation, right?
Yeah, and you probably have 100 megs available to you, you know, so it's just clean and it's simple to use.
Right.
So yeah, your life is now changed from being in an office every day to being wherever you want to be. So tell us a little bit about where you've been this month.
Well, you know, we're making the rounds. So we live out in Colorado, obviously, and heading across the country. Karen and I kind of drive everywhere for a couple reasons. One, we're like seeing the country as we go, but we're going to visit with other OTGers. You know, so for you guys, I know you know this, but everybody else out there, we're running a group called OTG Consulting, stands for Old Telecom Guys and Gals. Yeah. But, you know, we're a bunch of ex-executives out here helping people move to the cloud. So, you know, started in Denver, you know, got out to, I don't know, we stayed somewhere out in Nebraska halfway, and then spent some time out in Chicago doing some work and some play out there. You know, everything kind of, what I love about this life, I'm still working like 8 to 10 hours a day. You know, everybody watches our YouTube channel and things and sees me like in Costa Rica or on a beach with a cocktail. They think I've, you know, retired. It's like, you know, I kind of sort of have, but I'm still working 8 to 10 hours a day, but I just do it on my own terms. And because of this technology, you can really work from anywhere. And I can tell you this because, you know, Karen and I drive around this country when we're not going elsewhere. It's hard to find a place where you don't have a really good signal. And I'm not talking about a signal just for a voice call. To run a call like this over, you know, even the 4G network, right? It's kind of hard to find a place. But so Chicago, was in New York for a little bit, upstate New York, and then I'll be here for a month. We're heading down to, you know, Long Island for a little bit of time, and we'll be back up here and heading back. But, you know, the great thing about this too is I can't even tell you dates and times or when will I be back in Colorado. I don't know. It's just, we just go with the flow, and I love it.
That's so great. Yeah, and the great thing about this is that work from anywhere is available to anybody that can do their work while they're mobile, because you've got all this connection, and it's so wonderful. But what's disruptive about it? How's it changing telco?
This right here, this call that we're on right here, I think is the largest disruptor. So just to kind of step back a little bit, you know, Avaya most recently just raised their hand and said, hey, we're going to wave the white flag, and we're kind of done developing the cloud ourselves. We're going to use our friends over at Ring Central and move our cloud customers to Ring Central. They call it ACO, Avaya Cloud Office. So that's a pretty big disruptor going over to what I'll call traditional hosted VoIP. This isn't traditional hosted voice in my mind anyway. I'd be interested, Doug and Dave, to get your opinion on this. But traditional hosted VoIP, Dave, is what you and I were doing, dropping a Polycom phone on someone's desk and you got BroadSoft or the likes in the background. That's what I'm calling traditional. So Avaya moving to traditional hosted VoIP. I think that's the next 5 years or so. But this stuff is really taking hold here. This is what I'm going to say is non-traditional in my mind. You send out a WebRTC link of some sort, and we just click on it, and we can not only communicate verbally, also video and screen share and everything else that goes along with it, which is pretty wild. And that call is free, right? Because you've got internet there where you are. Doug's got internet. I've got internet here at the Marriott. So at the end of the day, we're riding over an existing internet service that we're utilizing for whatever. But this communication right here essentially is free. You might be paying for a seat on one of these platforms, but I'm talking about the transmission. There's no PSTN. There's no origination and termination costs and cost per minute. Oh, you know, how much time do we have here? You know, what kind of bill have we racked up, right? We don't have to worry about that stuff anymore. Remember the days when you have a relative in the background, this is a long distance call. Hurry up, get here, right? Remember those days, Doug?
Well, actually, I think if your family was like mine, there was a code. So when you arrived in Pittsburgh safely, you rang once and then hung up, and then you rang again or something like that, and then they knew you were there. So there were all these schemes, and here I didn't know such a thing existed growing up in Toronto, but when I went to college in Oregon, I started encountering in the early 80s. Like you, I was in college in the 80s, and right into the 70s, there were people in Portland, Oregon, who had family lines. Their household was sharing. I thought that was sort of like a rural phenomenon.
Yeah.
It was a suburban thing in Portland. People, 4 or 5 people in a family were sharing that one phone line with 3 or 4 other households. And, I thought that was something that, you'd find in East Germany or something like that, not, in the most advanced place in the world. So, the revolution in telecommunications, in communications, and to your point, in basically almost freemium communications, right, is just a phenomenon that we've kind of lived through and we've kind of accepted. There was a fellow named Harry Newton that was sort of a big deal when you and I were both starting out, and he kind of famously said when this started to show up that the distance has been taken out of long distance. So
Yeah.
in other words, basically now all communications, and I think he called this sometime in the very early 90s, even before VoIP really came on the scene. He said basically where we're going is all calls, all sessions, all communications will be local effectively. So it's almost as if basically we're all inside that hotel that you're staying at, and we're just having an electronic conference without, even leaving the building. The quality is excellent. And by the way, notwithstanding issues that do show up, were you in London, were you in Johannesburg, South Africa, probably the quality of this session would be about the same.
Exactly, it's wild. And didn't Newton do that Newton Telecom dictionary with all the
Yeah.
acronyms? That's what I thought.
Yeah. He had Teleconnect magazine. He had Newton's Telecom dictionary.
Yeah.
And he used to have a conference every year. And then, we can talk about this as a sort of side phenomenon of the cycles that we've lived through, of a timing and good timing on how to sell a business. He sold Teleconnect magazine right before the first IT crash, basically, right after 2000. Did very well. They got out just at the right time. My history goes back to right after deregulation. There was also a phenomenon. It was exciting. There was a used equipment market. You could buy used Nortel cards that went inside a PBX. It was a huge thing. So we actually started a publication originally to serve just that market, to go to enterprise end users, telling the story of all these guys that were basically selling used equipment. That's basically how, by the way, I came into the CCA eventually, because I met Joe Marion through that process. Joe goes back. Joe, I think, actually was part of that world. And then he became the director of something called the NATD. And this was maybe like 91, 92 or something like that. It's some time ago. But, within a decade already, there was transition going on. The software had become a bigger part of the advertising in our publication versus hardware. And soon after that, of course, VoIP and then cloud-based services. I think there were some people already selling subscription-based services. They weren't calling it cloud. That actually emerged fairly soon. I would say right in the early O's. Basically, there were already people who kind of saw it, and they weren't maybe even articulating the word cloud, but they were sort of actually adopting that model. There were E911 guys that were starting to do that, and so on. So, one of the things that prompted our conversation today is, are we now facing another revolution? So, good question is, we have Teams out there. We have Microsoft Teams. We have some other platforms. Do these things, combined with WebRTC, combined with some other things, do these things sort of overtake what we've called cloud communications?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think so. I had a call with some investor types early this morning, and I specifically, they were asking me questions about, this world, Doug, different angle, but just basically what you just asked. I said, great, let's do the call and I'll set this up. We happen to be a Google shop, so I'll set it up and I'll send you a Google link. I mean, just
Right.
like Microsoft Teams, Google's prominently just popped on my radar the other day. They had something that was highlighting the the Google Meet on the side. I'm like, oh, let me start using this. It's very easy to use. So I think the answer to your question is absolutely, it's very disruptive. I've been talking about this for, I don't know, I don't exaggerate, but it seems like it's probably at least 8 to 10 years about, the new phone company is not going to look like AT&T or Verizon. It's going to look more like, Microsoft or Google or an Amazon, or two guys in a garage are developing something right now we don't know about. But the point is, if I can easily send a link out to somebody, or if I can click on their name or, whatever it is, like, an IM, like Dave and I are sending emails back and forth and say, why don't I just talk to Dave? If I can just click on that little icon, which is Dave, it might be his name in the corner. It's a URL, it's a WebRTC link, and we have a communication. Why would I have to pick up a phone? Right. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I have not had a phone on my desk for, it's probably been close to 10 years. I'm talking about a phone with a little curly cord you pick up in the dial pad. I mean, obviously I got one of these, this is my phone, and, this is the phone that I'm on, this laptop, right? I mean, do either one of you guys still have a phone on your desk?
No, I got rid of mine a long time ago. I'm probably about 5-6 years without a VoIP phone since bondage took my life over. So
I have to confess, I've got a phone on my desk. It's supplied by one, I won't name it, one of our fine CCA members, but actually the app that they provide that runs on my cell phone, that's what I almost use all the time, because that follows me around. Yeah. So and when in olden days when we were traveling and going to conferences, what was great for me, and I know it was probably good for you guys too, is that basically there was no, that was another transition that's happened, right? There's no difference between being in one place to another, to your point, Jeffrey, right? In other words, you're answering now, whether it's a business line that you have or your cell line or whatever arrangement you have, you're basically able to control, you're in charge, and you basically operate the same way wherever you are.
Right.
But I want to bring us to another direction. So I think right now we've been talking about, if you will, the tip of the spear. In other words, if you think about the economy as this sort of big spear, and there's a tip, and there's a group of companies and people that are right at the very front of the line, and they're embracing change and use change and like change, right? It's to their great advantage. Is there a counter story? Is there another story here that's also relevant to the CCA membership and also all the people that feed into the CCA members, which is there are lots of industries and occupations which are not information-based. They are Prem-based. They are occupations and jobs that have to be done on site. So let me start with just a thought. You're vacationing in a resort town. There are lots of small businesses just nearby, even maybe right in the hotel itself, right? In the resort complex and then beyond. Were we to walk from your room and just walk in any direction, just walk in one direction for 3 or 4 miles and knock on the door of every business, how many businesses would we find that are VoIP? How many businesses would we find that are Teams or something like that? And how many businesses would we find that are like 1986 or 1992?
Yeah, interesting. It's funny, I was just having a conversation with a buddy of mine that his business is around the corner. He happens to be working from home, but they are using Zoom, Teams, Ring Central, I think were the 3 that they were using. So, I think to answer your question, Doug, if we walked up and down the street, I'm going to make this up, but it'd be directionally correct, about 20%, call it 20 to 30%, what I find have converted to hosted VoIP completely from 1986.
Right.
Phone line. I think today when you go up and down the street, the cable guys have done a real good job too of replacing 1986 with what we would call cloud-based communications. They call it digital voice. There's still a phone on somebody's table or desk or counter. Up and down the street here, you're going to walk up, you're going to see a real estate shop, you're going to see a coffee shop, you're going to see those kinds of places may have a cable service, and they may have a phone, but it's a VoIP phone, right? And I think you'd be hard pressed to find somebody with a 1986 phone kind of plugged into a phone jack at Small Business USA. So maybe it's, 20–30% are, cloud-based hosted VoIP like we're talking about. There's probably 30% plus that may be small business or on that cable kind of phone service. And I don't know, it's probably less than 20% that have that old 1986 phone, I would imagine.
Well, let me press you on this point for a second. Where you are, there's probably a convention center and or some sort of public facility. There's probably a city hall. There's probably some buildings that belong to the local school district. So where I'm going with this is, if we think about the structure of employment in almost any place USA now, right? Used to be the biggest employer in town would be like a steel factory or a car plant, or a long time ago, right? These days, it's usually a hospital or a medical system, right? A hospital and all of its outpatient clinics,
right?
Then followed probably by a whole complex of governments, government offices, a justice hall, and so on, and so on, and then maybe school and so on. So if you think about those institutions, some of them have been really very slow to make the changes you're describing, and they hire a lot of people. There's a lot of phones still.
Yes.
Now, where I'm going with this is, and this sort of prompted our conversation, Dave and I, the other day, was Panasonic, actually, believe it or not, in the middle of everything, has come out with new desktop phones that are made for an office, and you plug them in somewhere, and they actually can work on different modes. And I kind of challenged them on this. When I talked to them and so on, I asked, gee, it's interesting that you're coming out with this type of technology. And their feeling was, yeah, there's a huge number of people that have transitioned and don't have a desktop phone, but we think there's actually a lot of applications for these devices. So is it possible that there's two realities that are actually true at the same time?
Yeah, anything's possible. I mean, Ford's coming out with a new Bronco that's all the rage. I guess they could come out with a horse and buggy too, and someone would that.
Right.
Up and down the street, right? I've gone to some country areas where that flies. So I think there's a possibility for two realities. It's just one is much, much more larger than the other. I mean, right. We're three phone guys here shaking our heads. The reason why I asked Panasonic that question, and even as I'm listening to you, I'm like, you got to be kidding me. But
they did. It happened.
Yeah,
it really happened.
And by the way, somebody will buy it. I run into people that are still buying an Avaya Prem-Based phone system, smaller businesses that should be on cloud, because there's a lot of VARs out there that are still selling this stuff because this is what they know.
And that's why I brought it up. In other words, when we were doing shows, this conversation happened all the time. And by the way, I'm not challenging the basic correctness of what you're saying.
Oh no,
but
no.
I'm sort of saying, gee, I think there might actually be this large tail behind the dog.
You're absolutely right. As you were talking, I was thinking too, back when I was CEO at ICG, I mean, I had a phone on my desk and I was saying, hey, take this phone off my desk. I don't want a phone anymore. This is going way back. Like I'm the crazy person that's still trying to drive this. We're technology guys. And I always have to remind myself too, not everybody is in the same bucket that we are. A lot of people don't even know what you're talking about. Like, what do you mean cloud-based communications? They have no idea, right? So to your point, Doug, there is a I guess a population out there that doesn't know anything about what we're talking about. They just need to pick up a phone and run their business. And if their trusted advisor shows up and says, hey, look at this brand new shiny Panasonic, you plug it into a phone, I almost said New England telephone. It's like Verizon, I'm here, a Verizon phone line, it works great, right? I mean, I'm talking about a standard Verizon phone line, not DC, not their VoIP product. I mean, that's still out there. I think, to your point, there's a wind down, I guess. Let me say this. There's a wind down going on that's going to take probably a lot longer than any one of us maybe would like to admit. That, to get every last copper phone line off the street here in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, is that going to happen in 10 years? I don't know.
Right.
I mean, but I can tell you the majority of businesses, the volume will probably be on cloud-based, inside of 5 years, certainly. But, is there a, small pawn shop down the street that might have a copper line 10 years from now? Probably.
Right. If they're still selling services to that line, right? Yeah.
Right. Well,
But,
that's the other thing. You bring up a great point, right? Because if you gotta go Google all this stuff. I mean, AT&T and Verizon have been petitioning. I think they pretty much have approval across the board now to take down all the POTS lines. I mean,
they want to get rid of it.
It's going to be too costly to run. You bring up another good point too, just to bring up here. As I talk with suppliers, the cost of those POTS lines are going up. I mean, they're over $100 in a lot of areas where they were less than 30 not too long ago. So, there's an economic driver going on here too that says, hey, you can keep those old lines if you want to pay a fortune for it, right?
Do you think that also the pandemic or, other things, especially the pandemic, has sort of forced maybe change? I'll relay a story actually about our friends at Ring Central. A while back, had nothing to do with the pandemic. There was a church here in Vancouver, Washington, that was a victim of arson, and the structure was badly damaged. And I stepped forward and got the Ring Central guys involved. They had to be temporarily relocated. Long story short, they had like an old-fashioned Merlin or something inside there, and church lady with a sweater didn't know how to. There was a very, very traditional communication system, and they had no concept that you had to be in the office to answer the phone. So one of the first discoveries out of this tragedy was, here's Ring Central, and they set them up with something really great. And they're like, hey, wait a second, you mean we don't have to be inside the building to talk to people? We can talk to people wherever we are, wherever they are. It was something they'd never heard of. And what I got out of that was, and I'll just say this about me, but I think it happens for all of us in this world. We can be in a kind of bubble and not be aware that there's a larger world out there of people where their experiences, they're doing something, their experiences never touch upon the knowledge of what you have been talking about, right? That basically the whole idea of unified communications, the whole idea of you can communicate from anywhere to anyone, anytime, and so on, until they experience it. And then when they experience it, they go, this is great. And so what I'm kind of wondering is, as we go through this transition, is there a message to the CCA community and to the channel beyond, right, of how to properly, to your point, because you just said there are guys out there still selling, old-fashioned PBX. Still happens, right? Is that because we don't know, or I should say, is that because we somehow haven't really taught the channel properly how to sell this to people? Do we use terms, do we use words that sort of mystify a larger public that would otherwise maybe buy this? Yeah.
Well, there are some people that just, they only know what they know, and that's just the way it's always been.
They know what they know.
Yeah. I forget who did this, but I saw a presentation about, back in the day before, there were refrigerators, they'd go out to a pond and take a saw and cut a big chunk of ice and then take it with the ice tongs and bring it to your house and put it in an ice box, right? Then they built these ice factories because there were places in Florida where you didn't have a pond with ice and you still had to put meat and things on ice. So they built these big refrigerated buildings that would make ice, and they would bring it to the people. By the way, the guys who are cutting the ice in the pond were not the guys who built the factories that manufactured ice. They said, hey, we're just going to keep working in the pond. And then there was this little thing called refrigerator that would go in everybody's kitchen, and they plugged it in. Those guys that made the refrigerators weren't the guys that built the factories. I'll be directionally correct. I don't know the whole story, but you get my point. There are still people cutting ice out of the ponds. There are still people that are selling a PBX, to your point, and they will never change. By the way,
won't change.
They'll just hit a brick wall at some point. But I think the economics, you reminded me of the real driver here is we, at OTG, we go out and talk to customers every day about this stuff. And that's why I see these bills. I see what's happening. It's not that, AT&T or Verizon, they're being evil. They just say, we have to get these people off of this network at some point because it costs us a fortune to run it. It's inefficient. But by the way, I can't cut them off. They have to use 911. They're using the service. The town would be crazy if I just shut all the phone service off. So what will happen is they're going to force those people to stop cutting ice out of the ponds and all of a sudden buy a refrigerator just because it's going to cost you 10 times as much to pull ice cubes from the pond than it is to run a refrigerator. That's what's going to happen. But to your point, you're outside of our little world, our own little worlds. Other things are going on out there. My wife is always reminding me the world doesn't revolve around you, Jeffrey. I don't know why she says that. But anyway, so you're right. There are people outside of our little world that are doing something different, right? Always. And we tend to, I always think as a technology guy, the window is closing much sooner than it is. The window of opportunity is right there, guys. We got to take advantage of it. You know, I probably sold, Dave, I probably sold that VoIP company too soon. I probably should have merged with you and did the deal with Vonage. But, you know, we thought the window was closing a lot sooner than it did.
Yep,
Right.
you were early on that. But, you know, that's the thing we look at because we're so close to it. And I love the fact that this communications technology is changing so much that it's freeing people up. It's gone beyond simultaneous ring, where your phone on your desk is now connected to the phone that's in your pocket. So that was what we did. That is what we did with the whole beginning of VoIP. But now we're wondering, will VoIP survive this next change? Because voice is practically free. And the more people lean into technology like the one we're using right now, it becomes pervasive. And then people stop wanting to pay $30 a month for the line that they have on their desk that they're barely using. So eventually it probably will be overtaken by these improvements, let's call it, but definitely it will change. And so just getting ahead of this curve is maybe what we need to be thinking about, is how do we bring that part of the business, the new part of the business into the scene without completely destroying the VoIP that is out there right now. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, well, I think the hosted voice over IP, the traditional VoIP that as we know it, doesn't survive, you know, as we knew it. It changes. Like, you know, we're still obviously talking over IP here. So this is still voice over IP. It's video over IP. You know, we're able to do screen share and everything else. I think what happens, because the guys we're talking about, the ones that are coming, they make money on other things. You know, if you can make your money on email and PowerPoint and, you know, Excel spreadsheets, whatever, or if you're, you know, Google, you make your money on advertising, or Amazon, you make your money on selling goods across the web. And oh, by the way, we do voice communications too, because we need to talk to our customers. And that's just an application that's free. So I think the message to all the traditional VoIP guys, you know, I still consider myself in this bucket, even though I'm not running a service provider anymore, but I feel like I'm still in this bucket. But, you know, the message is you have to be providing something else. Like, you know, it's a community. It's a community, it's a platform where we work and play. And if you can run that and maintain those eyeballs and users, that's how you win. Because if there's a platform where, you know, Dave, you and I are talking back and forth, maybe it's LinkedIn like, or it's, you know, pick any one of these platforms we mess around with during the day. That's kind of both, you know, fun and work, right? You're communicating with friends, you've got social media going on, you've got some business going on. And oh, by the way, I can just click to call for free. That's pretty cool. So I think if you're just doing hosted voice, traditional hosted voice as we knew it and loved it so much, and it's still out there today, you have to start thinking about how else can I get people to stay on my platform? It can't be to just pick up a phone with a curly cord and make a call, because I think if that's all you do, that's a problem, right? Wouldn't you agree?
Yes, I agree. So the challenge though is, like you and I were talking about Microsoft Teams and how that's going to change telephony as we know it. So is it a threat? Is everybody going to start shifting into a suite of services, not just voice, but voice is just part of this larger suite of services that customers can buy as bundle, right? So let's talk about Microsoft Teams and the threat that it is to traditional VoIP service providers.
Well, the first thing that I've noticed, you and I talked about this the other day, I've had 4 different traditional hosted VoIP guys come up to me at OTG and say, hey, Jeffrey, great news. We've partnered with Microsoft and we're doing the SIP trunking attached to Microsoft and we're going to make it all work so much better. And they're just so excited about it. That's great. Excellent. But on the side, I'm saying, hey guys, you do understand that they're probably going to be your biggest competitor if you don't see them as that already. They're going to take down all the voice market. All you're doing is accelerating their move into the market. By the way, I'm all for the technology shift, and I think that has to happen. So I think they're doing the right thing. But to your point, if you just become the plumbing for the UC player, like a Microsoft or Google, if you just become the plumbing, you're basically the new PSTN. Voice is almost free, and it is a race to zero because the cost. I was on the phone with someone the other day. I'll leave the name off, and they said, "Hey, yeah, we're about $3 or $4 a user for the voice." Okay, great. And Microsoft is running the seat. It's all the IM&P. It's all the presence that Microsoft owns the customer. The VoIP guy is now just the plumbing. And Dave, you'll remember this back when we were running our voice businesses together. We would sell hosted VoIP. Why? Because I wanted to own the customer experience. And if our sales guy failed, they could drop back and do SIP trunks into the PBX. And the reason why I say failed, well, we'd still go get some business, but at the end of the day, you're still picking up on a via phone system or whatever it was. And we're on the backside. No one knows who we are. We're not really part of the experience. The phone system is the experience. So now fast forward to today, if Microsoft is the user experience, that's where we're doing email. That's where we're doing instant messaging and presence. That's where we're doing all the cool stuff. And that's what we see all day long. And somebody else is just terminating the call from New York to California behind the scenes. I don't think that's a good long-term play. It certainly isn't a lucrative long-term play because you've got everybody and their brother lining up to do that. So guess what? Who do I use? Am I going to use the most expensive plumber to terminate my calls or the least expensive? It's probably going to be the least expensive.
I think, you've got Microsoft Teams, you've got possibly Google and maybe even Apple and some other players who are going to go and make a direct play for the market that has basically been filled by other people up to this point. And I think just as Jeffrey's been saying, just as in a sense, all of us were part of a massive disruption of what came before, we can see the first part of, since I think you're near the ocean, the first part of a wave of change going this way. And I think Jeffrey's correct. I think in terms of people actually as players, I think it'll play out as it always does. I think there are going to be people who are going to say, I'm near retirement. I don't want to learn anything new. I'm all done. I'm going to get on my boat or golf course or whatever. And, I'll let my business dwindle down. And that's, by the way, an old and a tried and true business practice. And there's nothing wrong with it, by the way. Folks that become attorneys, the old attorney never is able to sell his practice because all of his customers are too old for the young guy to want to buy, right? So, but that's a way to sort of close out a business. And I think part of our message to everybody out there that is in the CCA and downstream in the channel is, if you want to go that way, just understand that's how it goes. I think it means that you take whatever the value of your business is now and sink it, right? You're just basically going to use it as, you're going to ride it out to the end. In terms of overall transition, though, I think obviously we're going to be moving on from here. That's sort of why I did want to challenge the sort of theory. It's kind of a slow process and then sudden. I think that's the best way to describe it. It's really, really slow, and we keep on seeing counterexample. But as Jeffrey said, I think one day you all of a sudden wake up and realize there is no one left that wants to buy this product. So if you don't have something else that you're selling, that's it. It's all over. It is surprising that historically in telecommunications, telecom, UC, whatever we want to call it, we've been a much slower body of change historically than other components. But I think that's going to change. And, the other thing, and maybe we'll leave this for another podcast for another day, the other thing that we need to consider is mobility. 5G, right? 5G is not just about speed. People keep on talking about speed. It's about the number of endpoints the network can handle. Jeffrey's doing this off of Wi-Fi in a hotel. 10 years from now, it might just be done directly on the network. We might see there might be so much availability of bandwidth available off of AT&T or Verizon or whoever you're using. If you're at least in a part of the building that you can pick up a signal, and even that's going to be mitigated too. So already, basically, those services are well inside the enterprise, and I think they're going to go even further. One thing I wanted to also, and again, maybe we'll put this up for another time. Jeffrey sort of briefly touched on a regulatory issue, which also we can't discount. That there's I think 3,100 counties in the United States. Each one has its own telecom law. Everybody has their own tax structure. And there's the requirement of a building occupancy to have a direct line, basically, to emergency services, right? How quickly can those regulatory structures change to promote change? In other words, where these restrictions and requirements are not going to be there anymore.
Yeah, that's always a tough one, and they're always very slow to move, as you know, Doug. And there are people that are running their business off of iPhones today, which are completely off that grid that you're talking about. And they're going to try. They're going to try, or they have to regulate what they can while they can. But this wave of change is happening so quickly. The stuff that we're talking about aren't even in the, I don't even think are in the, sites when you talk about, people running a business. Like, if you talk about walking up and down this street, so we go open up a bar down the street here, and what do we need? Well, we need internet, because we're going to probably have some flat screens and some TV, right. And we're going to have a telephone number, and it's probably, if we own it, it might be just our cell phones. And, any employees are on cell phones. So I think I see more and more small businesses starting today just skipping all of this process.
Right.
They certainly aren't ordering the 1986 phone line that you talked about. They're certainly not ordering a hosted VoIP line that we've been talking about. They're just skipping it and going right to the internet and a 4G/5G device in their hand. And I think you're right. I mean, this is a topic for another day. I would like to really dive in there. I'm a big fan of what's going on with 5G and what it's going to do to the marketplace, because it is huge with IoT, the Internet of Things. People think it's just speed on that device that I was holding my hand. No, it's everything. It's the thermostat in here. It's the lights out on the street. It's like the list goes on and on and on. All the meters and things that are connected, which is pretty amazing when you think about it that way, and communicating with all these devices. I mean, all devices have the ability to communicate some way, shape, or form when you start talking about those types of services.
And as you just said, there's the reason why the new Joe's Bar and Grill, the guy that just sets up, you and I decide, hey, we're just going to set up a little pool room and have a bar and stuff. There's just no commercial reason whatsoever for that landline, right? It doesn't do one thing for us now, not even down to some spouse calling and saying, hey, have what's his name call me back and leave the bar or whatever. Those days are all gone, right? No one communicates that way now.
Right.
So, and we can go down the list of other types of businesses, and I wrote down here, and again, this may be something for our next conversation, as awful as it is, right? The pandemic and the economic destruction that basically it's brought is the kind of economic wave where a lot of businesses disappear and then are replaced eventually by a new business. So yesterday, the Wall Street Journal reported, for example, that the old Sears stores and Penny stores and other department stores, Amazon is talking about converting those into hubs. You're going to actually do distribution hub from the mall you used to shop at that you don't go to anymore.
Right.
So that's an example of physical change. And then I think that, to your point, as those businesses turn over in location after location, what comes in, right, can't be what used to be there.
You're absolutely right. And I think this lockdown has accelerated this technology shift we're talking about here by at least 5 years.
Right.
So in other words, if we didn't have this, we'd be behind 5 years. But now everyone all of a sudden said, hey, everyone work from home until we figure this out. So this was kind of jammed down everybody's throat that we have to make this work and work from anywhere. You know, Karen and I, we live on a ski mountain, and we'd go for walks and walk by the ski shops and things. I mean, it was like a B-rate movie when you look in the windows. I mean, ski goggle boxes toppled over, hand sanitizer out. Like, you know, they shut down the mountain like with a moment's notice, and employees just left these shops and never came back. They're starting to come back now. But, you know, there was months we'd walk by and you just look in there, you know what I mean? It's like, you know, a movie you'd be watching, like, you know, where the zombies took over and like all the humans are gone and the stores are just like ransacked and the people are gone. It was pretty close to that. Right. So that being said, to your point, I mean, that was something that forced this shift, and everyone had to go figure this out. Like, okay, work from home. Well, guess what? A lot of people didn't even have a phone line. So how do I contact customers? You know, Zoom went through the roof because of this pandemic, right? I mean, and everything else we're talking about, I think, was accelerated. And I think that's a good way to look at it. It's probably accelerated by at least 5 years. I mean, wouldn't you guys agree?
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. It has changed everything for most people. That genie is now out of the bottle, and he's not going back in, because people discovered that they could be productive from home. And so they could be productive from anywhere. You're proof of that. So I love that it accelerated the big change, but now we have to figure out, how do we deal with that big change? Is it permanent? What do you think?
Well, I think it is permanent. The change is permanent. I can talk about me personally. Like, you know, I'm not going to be rushing to go to a big convention center to an event. By the way, I'm not real excited to get on planes and race off to meet with somebody, or even go from Copper Mountain down to Denver for a meeting when I can just do it like this. I mean, it's more efficient for me. It's more efficient for the person on the other end. I don't have to worry about going to find parking and being late for the meeting, getting in traffic. I mean, I can go on and on and on about the efficiencies are just huge. And it gives you time back. You know, part of what Karen and I are pitching out there to everybody in the world is living your best life. And like, time is our most valuable resource. It's so much more valuable than money, especially as us old guys, we're getting older. You start to, every year that ticks by, it's like, holy shit, you got that right. So it's like, you know, if I can get time back, I'm really excited about that. So this push has given us time back. And to your point, Dave, you know, back in the day when I ran big sales organizations, I wasn't a huge fan of working from home. So I'd say, you know, people would be working from home, you get bored for a second, go in the fridge, eat your leftover Chinese food, even though it's like 10 o'clock between breakfast and lunch. You turn on the TV, you're watching Scooby-Doo. Before you know it, like 2 hours go by, you didn't do anything. So that was the old Jeffery Pearl. Today, I'm watching this. You know, I work 8 to 10 hours a day, working from anywhere. I'm very efficient. And now, don't get me wrong, there are some people that take advantage of companies and their job, and they're not working real hard. I get it. But most companies that I read about, and I talk to a lot of CEOs and people running businesses, most companies have a wake-up call that we certainly can get by with less real estate, pulling, maybe we have to pull half of our people into the office at some point. You know, there are large companies that are bringing a very small percentage of their people back. And Dave, I think this is permanent for a lot. I forget who it was this morning. I reposted something on LinkedIn. I'll probably get it wrong, so I won't say, but it was a large company that they basically are saying 2 to 3 days a week forever, people are working from home. I don't know if you guys saw that out there today, but a large company, that's the way it is. People are much more efficient, and they're very appreciative. To your point, Dave, the genie's been let out of the bottle. People were able to be home for dinner with their family and their kids and spend a little more time, you know, maybe going out and taking care of the garden rather than fighting traffic and bumper to bumper, you know, road rage, right? So it's like, now I can just stay home, and I've been given 2 hours back for my commute. Oh, I've been given another 2 hours back because I don't have to worry about someone coming to my office just chewing my ear off when I'm supposed to be working. I mean, don't get me wrong, you need that social interaction, but you've taken control of your life back, where you've gotten, I don't know, how many hours a day do we get back? 4 hours a day?
Well, and not only that, Jeffrey, you've actually touched on the fact that our brain trust this morning is noticeably monochromatic demographically, right? So, think about the number of people out there that are caring for an older person in their home. Think about the number of people that have small children. Think about the number of people that have this or that situation at home, which causes them to need to be at least physically present, although maybe they don't need to do an activity in their house that's regarding that assistance all the time. So what we're actually doing also is liberating a whole bunch of people. We're liberating a lot of labor, right? So now you have maybe an aging parent in the home, and that maybe caused someone to not even be able to go out and work or be able to be part of a company. Now that person can work out of their home, can do work at 3 or 4 in the morning if they want to. There's so much more flexibility, and then, as you said, just the amount of, I think people that always commuted have just discovered how much of their life was being spent in a car. And also there's an economic efficiency, right? I mean, not to mention, I guess, environmental issue. It's got to be the case that almost every city in the United States is now meeting their carbon target, because if tens of thousands of people are not making a commute every morning, that basically achieves just about everyone's goal for the next 10 years, I have to think.
That's amazing. There are other things going on here that are just incredible as you bring those up. I mean, you could do a whole show, guys, on this. The benefits even outside of communications are just huge. You're absolutely right.
Huge. And I think that this is going to be, again, I think we're laying the groundwork for a series of talks, because I think one of the things that we should talk about is how law and regulation basically drive the market. It's not as visible to us every day, those of us that are in the market, but it's always working there in the background. And I have this idea that basically as cities and state government, county governments, sort of themselves, literally their own people experience this and they say, hey, it's pretty good. They're bound to start, the force of a county government is not to be underestimated. They're the people that zone. They're the people that decide where a factory is going to be or where a commercial office building is going to be and so on, right? So as they move forward, we might see a revolution in zoning. We might see a completely new concept of how you do planning, where basically you set up structures or buildings or whatever you want to call them that combine basically commercial and residential activities all in one thing. And basically it's pretty environmental, right? You don't have people commuting. You have people doing everything that they need to do within walking distance, which also, by the way, is healthier. So, I mean, the impacts kind of go on and on. And I mean, I think the point we've been all talking about, there are companies that basically had a winning sort of formula in the world we just left. Now there's going to be companies that have a winning formula to basically what I think will be the world we're about to enter.
At the end of the day, guys, we've talked about a lot of pieces here. It's certainly not doom and gloom. It's the opposite. It's very exciting. It's a brave new world. It's giving us a lot of our life back, and it's really exciting to me. And I think, no matter what, if you're the guy that's cutting blocks of ice out of the lake, to chill your food, and you're not going to move with the punches, that's fine. Doug, I think you hit it nail on the head. Certain old dogs, it's hard to teach an old dog new tricks, as the old saying, right, goes. I think there are a lot of young dogs out here that will learn new tricks. And a lot of us in the hosted voice space are adding services. And as I talk to my friends and cronies in this space, they aren't talking about hosted voice over IP. They're talking about unified communications wrapped around maybe contact center or integrating with software, CRMs and things like that. So there are a lot of ways, I think, for the traditional hosted voice over IP guys to create hooks into this new world that we're talking about. But, I, for one, I'm not giving any of this time back. When the dust settles, I'm not going back into an office environment. I'm going to stay out on the road and I'm just going to keep communicating from whatever way is easiest for me. And I think I'm probably not the only one, right?
Yep. So Doug, any closing comments from you?
No, I was just thinking as Jeffrey was talking about that maybe one of our messages here is asking yourself, what business am I in? Right? Am I in the business of selling a specific commodity, or am I in the business of selling a kind of service? So if I'm in the business of helping people take their business and communicate inside the business and communicate with the outside world, that's a liberating thought. I don't have to be tethered to one type of communication. I can embrace new things. So, my business basically straddles two worlds because we report on you guys, but we're part of what used to be called the publishing business, right? And it's no big secret that the publishing business, like every other industry, was impacted by these changes. But the publishers who survived basically said, hey, you know what? I'm not in the business of publishing a newspaper or magazine. I'm in the business of delivering content. And it doesn't matter how I deliver it, whether it's through a podcast or online or through a bulletin, that's fine. However my readers want to get it, I'll give it to them that way. And the issue is actually, I'm going to focus on great content. And as long as I'm delivering great content, they're going to find it and they're going to use it and like it, and maybe will be willing to pay for it, or someone will pay for it. So I think that that's true for every other business. In other words, if we decide we're in the business of helping people communicate, that's a very liberating thing. And I think there's a great future for CCA members basically on that basis. We'll keep on going.
Yeah, when it comes to WebRTC, I thought that was going to change the world fast and make voice free, but it still needed to be more refined. And now look what's happened.
Right.
As far as I know, Slack has come through with WebRTC and changed the way that people can communicate inside of that application. And I think it continues to go into all kinds of software because everything is an API. And so it makes it very easy for WebRTC to come right in there and create a voice channel that people can speak over. So it is about to change the world in many, many ways. The integrations into software are primary now. And so you can't really have, for instance, a CRM without some sort of voice component, or in the case of Slack, a messaging API that needs also voice. So instead of having to pick up your phone, now you can just talk right through the app. It's so much more convenient and so much more effective. And I think that's what we were talking about today, is the changes that all of this new technology is making in the way that we communicate.
So Karen's in the other room telling me, Jeffrey, they're all waiting for you on your Zoom call. So I have an 11 o'clock a.m. here, 9 o'clock Colorado time Zoom call with OTG. So I just thought, oh, well, wait a minute. Because Morgan Rose is calling her, my daughter in Chicago. And you got to get dad on this call. They're all waiting. So, I'm like, I have my iPhone next to me. So I just went into the calendar, initiated Zoom, and just handed it to Karen. She's in there talking to the whole team. But how wild is that? Like, I'm like in the middle of all this. It's like, okay, don't worry. Like, we can run multiple meetings, multiple devices. I'm like covering my Karen. I'm being recorded. You need to go, like, start this call right now. And she's in there. Well, we don't have your passcode. But isn't that funny to you? I mean, I just got my iPhone, click, boom, here, Karen. She's in there running the call, and they're all on.
That's great.
And you're doing that without a shirt, a tie, or conference room.
I know, exactly. This is huge. And this is why I think we aren't going back, because, we're not the only ones saying this.